You began writing sketches for magazines.
The doctors told me that if I did not stop, I would die. It is the story of every child who has ever been lost.
A world of immense light and shadow.
But the success was shadowed by tragedy. My separation from Catherine was inevitable, but all around us were the dead and the dying.
Charles, my dear fellow, it is good to see you. You seem in better spirits today. The air here is clear, and for a moment the world and its relentless churn seem a universe away.
Wilkie, your presence is always a tonic. And you are right, the quiet is a welcome respite. Sometimes I feel the roar of London is permanently etched inside my skull, a constant, grinding machinery of memory and obligation. Let us talk. It has been too long since we have truly talked.
It has indeed, and that is precisely my intention. Not the usual chatter of publishers and print runs, but a more reflective conversation. I have been thinking a great deal about the grand narrative of a life, how the first chapters so irrevocably shape the last, and I find myself drawn back to your beginning. Portsmouth, was it not?
Portsmouth, yes. February 7th, 1812. A Friday's child. My father, John, was a clerk in the Navy Pay Office then, a man of immense good nature and a vocabulary that could charm a bird from a tree. He had a certain grandeur about him, a belief that something wonderful was always just around the corner, usually something that cost a little more than he had in his pocket.
I have always been fascinated by your father, a character, it seems, straight from one of your own novels. You have described him with such a mix of affection and, shall we say, exasperation. This Micawber-like quality, this eternal optimism in the face of financial reality, it must have been a difficult thing for a child to witness.
Difficult is a gentle word for it. It was a constant state of performance. We were gentlefolk, you see, even when we could not afford the baker. My father's belief in his own prospects was a kind of magnificent, self-imposed delusion. He was a loving man, do not mistake me, but his love could not pay the bills. That task, it seemed, fell to everyone else.
And your mother, Elizabeth, where did she stand in this domestic theatre?
My mother, she was a woman of great energy, but often misdirected. She attempted to establish a school for young ladies, the Mrs. Dickens establishment, but not a single pupil ever materialized. She had a certain theatricality herself, a tendency towards nervousness and complaint. When the crisis finally came, when the wolves were not merely at the door, but in the larder, it was she who made the decision that changed everything for me.
You speak of the move to London and the subsequent decline in fortune. I have only ever heard whispers of this time, Charles. You hold it so close. But it was in Camden Town that the foundations of your world truly began to crumble, was it not?
Camden Town. Bayham Street. A place of threadbare respectability where every knock at the door sent a jolt of terror through the house. The creditors grew bolder, their visits more frequent. My father, with his grandiloquent letters and promises of payment, could no longer hold them at bay. I remember the slow, agonizing disappearance of our possessions. First the silver, then the books, my precious books. Each one felt like a part of my own soul being pawned away.
And then the inevitable happened. The debt to the baker, a sum of £40, was it? A modest amount to shatter a family.
£40. It seems almost absurd, does it not? For that sum, my father was taken to the Marshalsea. I remember the day with a clarity that frightens me, the profound, bottomless shame of it. He tried to maintain his characteristic flourish, referring to it as the collegio, as if it were some grand tour. But I knew. I saw the grim reality behind the bars.
And you, a boy of just 12, were left outside, the man of the house, so to speak.
I was. My mother and the younger children eventually joined him in the prison, as was the custom. But I was sent to lodge with a family friend, a Mrs. Roylance. I was adrift, an orphan in all but name. And it was then that my mother, in her desperation, secured a position for me, a position that I feel even now as a brand upon my heart.
Warren's Blacking Factory. The very name has a grim industrial sound to it.
It was a hell on earth, Wilkie, a dilapidated, rat-infested warehouse by the Thames. My task for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, was to paste labels onto pots of boot polish. For this I earned 6 shillings a week. The degradation of it, the sheer soul-crushing monotony, I cannot adequately express the secret agony of my soul as I sank into this companionship. The other boys, what were they like? They were not unkind, but I was not one of them. I was the young gentleman who had fallen. Every day I felt my hopes of becoming a learned and distinguished man dying within me. I wandered the streets during my lunch hour, a solitary, miserable child, dreaming of a life that had been snatched away.
And your parents, did they not see your suffering?
My father was in prison. My mother, this is the part that still twists the knife. When my father was released after 3 months, thanks to a small inheritance, I naturally assumed my servitude would end. But my mother insisted I continue at the factory. She said, "The money is good. Imagine." When my father, to his eternal credit, saw my state and declared I must be removed, she argued against it. I never forgave her.
Good God, Charles. I never knew. To feel so utterly abandoned by your own mother, it explains so much. The fierce independence, the relentless drive, the deep abiding sympathy for the lost and the forgotten in your work. It was all forged in that dark, rat-infested place.
It was. It gave me a rage against the world, a burning sense of injustice that has never left me. But it also gave me my characters. The streets of London became my university. I saw the darkness and the despair, but I also saw the flashes of humanity, the humor, the resilience. Every face in the crowd was a story waiting to be told.
So, after the factory, there was a return to some semblance of normality, a return to education.
Yes, for a time. I was sent to a school, Wellington House Academy. It was rather a chaotic establishment, run by a brutish headmaster who delighted in caning us, but at least it was a school. It was a chance, however flawed, to reclaim what I had lost. But the family's finances remained precarious, and at 15, my formal education was over for good.
From schoolboy to the world of law. A solicitor's clerk. It seems an unlikely path for the man who would later satirize the legal system so mercilessly.
It was a means to an end, a way to earn a living, but I quickly realized that the law was not for me. The endless scratching of pens, the dusty precedents, the deliberate obfuscation of truth, it was a world of tedious and expensive ritual. But it was there that I saw the raw material for what would become my life's work. I saw the inner workings of the system, its pomposity, its absurdities, its devastating impact on ordinary lives.
And it was during this time that you discovered a new skill, a new path out of the drudgery. Shorthand.
Gurney's system of shorthand. It was a devilishly complex thing to learn, a kind of linguistic labyrinth. I practiced day and night determined to master it. It was my escape route. With that skill, I could become a journalist, a reporter. I could be at the center of things, a witness to the unfolding drama of politics and public life.
And a witness you became, a parliamentary reporter. You must have seen the great figures of the age debating the fate of the nation.
I did, and it was a profoundly disillusioning experience. I saw the hypocrisy, the self-interest, the utter disconnect between the grand speeches and the reality for life for the poor. It gave me a lifelong cynicism about politics. But as a training ground for a novelist, it was unparalleled. It taught me to listen, to observe, to capture the essence of a character in a few choice phrases.
While you were forging this new career, another more personal drama was unfolding. A young woman by the name of Maria Beadnell. Your first love, I believe.
Maria. Yes, she was the daughter of a banker, a beautiful, flirting, maddening creature. For 3 years I was utterly besotted with her. She was my Dora, my muse, my torment. I wrote her endless letters, composed terrible poetry, suffered all the exquisite agonies of a young man in love with a woman entirely out of his reach. Her parents disapproved? Vehemently. I was a mere journalist, the son of a man with a checkered financial history. I was not a suitable match for a banker's daughter. They sent her to Paris to forget me, and when she returned, she had. She treated me with a coolness that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. It was a bitter, painful lesson in the brutal realities of class and money.
But, like the blacking factory, you turned this private pain into public art. The character of Dora in David Copperfield. She is Maria, is she not? The beautiful, impractical child wife?
There is a great deal of Maria in Dora, yes, but time gives one perspective. Years later, when I was a famous author, Maria contacted me again. She was a middle-aged woman now, a wife and mother. We arranged to meet, and in my foolish, romantic heart, I expected to see the girl I had loved. But the woman who arrived was fat and toothless and silly. The illusion was utterly shattered. It was a comic tragedy, and it taught me that the past is a country to which we can never truly return.
While your heart was mending, your career was beginning to take flight. You began writing sketches for magazines, little vignettes of London life. The first appearance of Boz.
Buzz, my younger brother's nickname. It seemed a suitably jaunty, unpretentious name for the work I was doing. I would roam the streets at night, observing, absorbing, and then rush home to write. When I saw my first sketch in print in the monthly magazine, I was so overcome with emotion that I had to walk the streets for hours, tears streaming down my face. It was the first real taste of success, the first proof that I could make my way in the world on my own terms.
And those sketches, collected as Sketches by Boz, led to something altogether grander, a commission from the publishers Chapman and Hall, a series of sketches to accompany the work of the popular illustrator Robert Seymour.
Yes, they had the idea for a Nimrod Club, a series of sporting misadventures. I, of course, knew nothing about sport, but I needed the money, and the opportunity was too good to refuse. I agreed, but on one condition, that I would be the senior partner in the enterprise. The illustrations would arise from my text, not the other way around.
A bold move for a young author.
I had learned the hard way that one must control one's own destiny. And I had a different idea for the club. I envisioned a more varied cast of characters, a more expansive canvas. And so Mr. Samuel Pickwick was born, and with him a literary phenomenon that would change my life forever.
The Pickwick Papers. It is difficult to convey the sheer scale of its success. It was not merely a book. It was a national event. People would gather on the docks to await the ships bringing the latest installment. There were Pickwick clubs, Pickwick merchandise. You were, overnight, the most famous author in England.
It was a whirlwind. The initial sales were modest, but then I introduced a character based on a Cockney boot boy I knew, a fellow by the name of Sam Weller, and suddenly sales exploded. From a few hundred copies an installment to 40,000. It was astonishing. But the success was shadowed by tragedy.
The suicide of Seymour, the illustrator.
Yes. He was a troubled man, prone to fits of melancholy. After only 2 installments, he shot himself. There were whispers that he was jealous of my growing prominence, that he felt he was the true author of Pickwick. It was a dreadful business, and it taught me an early lesson in the dark side of fame.
But you found a new illustrator, a young man who went by the name of Fizz, Hablett Knight Brown, a partnership that would define your work for years to come.
Fizz was a genius. He had a way of capturing the very essence of my characters, of bringing them to life in a way that was both faithful to my vision and uniquely his own. We had a kind of unspoken understanding, a creative sympathy that is very rare.
At the same time as this dizzying professional success, your personal life was also undergoing a profound transformation. You met Catherine Hogarth.
Catherine. She was the daughter of George Hogarth, my editor at the Evening Chronicle. A good-natured, placid, gentle soul. After the fire and ice of Maria Beadnell, Catherine's calm demeanor was a balm to my spirit. We were married in April of 1836, just as Pickwick was taking off. The early years were happy. We were young, I was successful, and the children began to arrive with startling regularity.
But there was another Hogarth sister, was there not? One to whom you were particularly close, Mary.
Mary. My dear, dear Mary. She was Catherine's younger sister, only 17. She came to live with us, and she became the light of our home. She was intelligent, beautiful, a perfect companion. I loved her as a sister, as a daughter, as a perfect ideal of womanhood. She was the best and purest creature I have ever known.
Her death, so sudden, so young, must have been a devastating blow.
It was the greatest sorrow of my life. We had all been to the theater, a happy, ordinary evening. That night she collapsed, and she died in my arms. I was utterly undone. I could not work, I could not think. I took a ring from her finger, and I have worn it every day since. For the first and only time in my career, I missed a deadline. I could not write the next installment of Pickwick, or Oliver Twist, which I had also begun. The grief was too raw, too overwhelming.
It is said that she became the template for the virtuous, idealized heroines in your novels. Rose Maylie, Little Nell. They are all echoes of Mary, are they not?
She represented a kind of purity, an innocence that the world corrupts and destroys. I dreamed of her every night after her death, and in my dreams she was my guide, my spiritual anchor. The memory of her has been a constant presence in my life, a reminder of a perfection that can never be reclaimed.
While you were grappling with this private grief, your public stature was only growing. You followed the triumph of Pickwick with Oliver Twist, a very different kind of book, darker, angrier, a direct assault on the new Poor Law.
The Poor Law of 1834 was a monstrous piece of legislation. It criminalized poverty, forcing the destitute into workhouses that were little more than prisons. I wanted to show the reality of that system, to hold up a mirror to a society that could treat its most vulnerable members with such calculated cruelty. I wanted to give a voice to the voiceless, to the abandoned children who were the true victims of this so-called reform.
You drew on your own childhood experiences, of course, the blacking factory, the sense of abandonment. Oliver's story is, in many ways, your own, albeit in a more extreme form.
It is the story of every child who has ever been lost, or hungry, or afraid. It is a plea for compassion in a world that is too often cold and indifferent. I knew that world from the inside, Wilkie. I had felt its sting, and I was determined to make my readers feel it too.
And you certainly succeeded. The novel was a sensation, but also a scandal. The depiction of Fagin and his den of thieves. It was a world that respectable society preferred to ignore.
And that is precisely why I had to write about it. The novel is not meant to be a comfortable read. It is meant to be a shock to the system, a wake-up call. I wanted to show that the line between respectability and criminality is often a very thin one, and that society itself is complicit in the creation of its own monsters.
After Oliver Twist, you turned your attention to another social evil, the brutal Yorkshire schools, Nicholas Nickleby. You and Fizz went undercover to investigate these establishments, did you not?
We did. We traveled to Yorkshire posing as representatives of a family looking to place a child. The reality of what we found was even worse than the rumors. These schools were dumping grounds for unwanted children, run by ignorant, sadistic brutes who starved and beat their pupils into submission. The character of Wackford Squeers is not an exaggeration, Wilkie. If anything, he is a pale imitation of the real men we encountered.
The novel had a real-world impact, did it not? Many of those schools were forced to close down in the wake of its publication.
That, to me, is the true measure of a writer's success. Not the sales figures, not the critical acclaim, but the ability to effect real change in the world, to shine a light into the dark corners of society, and by doing so, to make that darkness recede. It is a sacred responsibility, and one that I have always taken with the utmost seriousness.
Your fame was now international, and in 1842, you decided to see for yourself the great Republican experiment across the Atlantic, your first trip to America. You went with such high hopes, did you not?
I did. I saw America as a beacon of liberty, a place free from the class-ridden, tradition-bound society of England. I expected to find a nation of free-thinking, enlightened individuals. The welcome I received was overwhelming. I was feted and feasted from the moment I stepped off the boat. But as the tour went on, I began to feel a growing sense of disillusionment.
What was it that so disappointed you?
Several things. The press, for one. It was intrusive, scurrilous, and utterly without principle. I was hounded everywhere I went, my every word misquoted, my privacy completely disregarded. And then there was the issue of copyright. American publishers were pirating my work and the work of other English authors without paying a penny in royalties. When I dared to speak out on this issue, I was accused of being a greedy, grasping mercenary.
But the greatest shock, the greatest sin in your eyes, was the institution of slavery.
It was a moral abomination, a stain on the soul of the nation. To see men and women bought and sold like cattle, to witness the casual brutality and the soul-destroying hypocrisy of it all, it filled me with a despair and a disgust that I have never forgotten. It was the ultimate betrayal of the ideals on which the nation was supposedly founded. I came back to England a sadder and a wiser man.
Your account of your travels, American Notes, and the American chapters of Martin Chuzzlewit caused a great deal of offense in the United States.
I'm not surprised. The truth is often offensive to those who do not wish to hear it. I wrote what I saw, and I did not flinch from the unpleasant realities. Martin Chuzzlewit was not a commercial success at the time, partly, I suspect, because of the American backlash, but I do not regret writing it. It was an honest book, and that is all that matters.
The poor sales of Chuzzlewit placed you in some financial difficulty, did they not? And it was out of this difficulty that one of your most beloved and enduring works was born, A Christmas Carol.
Yes, I was in debt, and I needed to write something quickly that would sell. But it was more than just a financial calculation. I had recently visited the ragged schools of London, and I was appalled by the ignorance and want I saw among the children. I wanted to strike a sledgehammer blow for the poor, to write a story that would open the hearts of my readers to the suffering of those around them.
You wrote it in a white heat in just 6 weeks.
I was completely possessed by it. I wept and laughed and wept again as I wrote. I walked the streets of London at night, the whole story alive in my head. When it was finished, I was certain it was the best thing I had ever written. But I was also determined that it should be a beautiful book, a book that people would treasure. I insisted on a lavish production with a colored frontispiece and a gold-stamped cover. And I insisted that it be sold for a price that ordinary people could afford, 5 shillings.
A decision that cost you dearly in terms of profit.
It did. The first edition of 6,000 copies sold out by Christmas Eve, but my profits were meager. It did not solve my financial problems, not by a long shot, but I did not care. The book had the effect I had hoped for. It became a part of the fabric of Christmas itself, a story that reminded people of the true meaning of the season, and for that, I am eternally grateful.
After the intensity of the carol, you took a rather surprising step. You packed up your entire family and moved to Italy for a year. What prompted that decision?
I was exhausted, Wilkie, mentally and physically. I needed a change of scene, a chance to recharge my creative energies. And I wanted my children to experience a different culture to broaden their horizons. So we decamped to Genoa, a chaotic, vibrant, beautiful city. It was a year of exploration, of reflection, of soaking in the art and history of that extraordinary country.
And it was during this time that you began to formulate the ideas for your next great novel, Dombey and Son, a book that marked a significant shift in your work, a more carefully planned and thematically unified novel.
Yes. Dombey was the first novel for which I had a complete plan from the outset. It was a story about pride, about the destructive power of a cold, unfeeling heart. It was also a story about the changing face of England, the rise of the railways, the new industrial age. It was a more ambitious, more somber book than anything I had written before.
It was also during this period that your philanthropic work began in earnest, particularly your collaboration with the great heiress, Angela Burdett Coutts.
Miss Coutts was a remarkable woman, with a deep and genuine commitment to social reform. Together, we embarked on a project that was very close to my heart, the establishment of a home for so-called fallen women. We called it Urania Cottage.
This was a home for prostitutes and other women who had been cast out by society, a very bold and controversial undertaking for the time.
We wanted to create a place of refuge, a place where these women could be rehabilitated, educated, and given a second chance at life. I was involved in every aspect of the project, from designing the house to interviewing the residents. I wanted it to be a home, not an institution, a place of kindness and compassion, not judgment and punishment.
You kept a case book, did you not, detailing the stories of these women?
I did. Their stories were heartbreaking,
a testament to the brutal hypocrisy of a society that condemned them while ignoring the poverty and abuse that had driven them to the streets. We had our successes and our failures, of course, but many of the women did go on to lead new lives, to emigrate and start afresh. It was some of the most difficult and the most rewarding work I have ever done.
As the 1840s drew to a close, you embarked on what many consider to be your masterpiece, the novel that you yourself called your favorite child, David Copperfield.
David Copperfield. Yes, of all my books, it is the one that is closest to my own heart. It was the first time that I had truly delved into my own past, that I had used the raw material of my own childhood in a direct and sustained way. The blacking factory, my father's financial troubles, my first love, it is all there, woven into the fabric of David's story.
It is a profoundly autobiographical novel, yet it is also a work of fiction. How did you navigate that line between memory and imagination?
I took the emotional truth of my own experiences and gave them to David. The sense of abandonment, the yearning for love and security, the struggle to find one's place in the world, those were my feelings. But the specific events, the characters, the plot, that is the work of the novelist. It was a painful book to write in many ways. It forced me to confront ghosts that I had long kept locked away. But it was also a deeply cathartic experience.
It was also during this time that you launched a new venture, a weekly magazine called Household Words. You were not just a novelist now, but an editor, a conductor, as you called yourself.
I wanted a platform, a way to speak directly to a wide audience on the issues of the day. I wanted to create a magazine that was both entertaining and instructive, that would combine fiction and journalism, social commentary and humor. And I wanted to champion the work of other writers, to give a voice to new talent. It was a demanding, all-consuming job, but it was also immensely satisfying.
It was through Household Words that you and I became collaborators and, more importantly, friends.
And I thank God for it every day, my dear Wilkie. Your contributions to the magazine were invaluable, and your friendship has been one of the great blessings of my life. You understand the craft, the dedication, the sheer, bloody-minded hard work that goes into this business of writing. And you are not afraid to tell me when I am wrong, a quality that is all too rare in a world filled with sycophants.
The early 1850s were a time of immense productivity, but also of great personal sorrow. The death of your father, and then, most tragically, of your infant daughter, Dora.
She was not yet a year old. Her death was a terrible blow, and it fell most heavily on Catherine. She suffered a nervous collapse, a period of profound depression from which, in some ways, she never fully recovered. It was a dark, dark time. The house felt empty, silent. The loss of a child is an unnatural grief, a wound that never truly heals.
It seems that this period marked a turning point in your relationship with Catherine. The strains, which had perhaps been hidden, began to surface more openly.
We had become a disappointment. The early affection had faded, replaced by a kind of weary habit. We had 10 children, a bustling, chaotic household, but we had grown apart. We had discovered that we were not, and had never been, suited to one another. She was a good woman, a devoted mother, but we had no intellectual or emotional sympathy. It was a mismatch of two souls, and it made us both deeply unhappy.
There have been whispers, Charles. More than whispers. A letter has recently come to light, written by a friend of Catherine's, that makes a shocking allegation. It claims that you tried to have her committed to an asylum. Is there any truth to this?
This is a private matter, Wilkie. A domestic misery that has been twisted and sensationalized by gossips and fools. The pressure on Catherine after the birth of 10 children, after the loss of Dora, was immense. Her mind was fragile. I was concerned for her well-being. I sought medical advice. The idea that I would try to dispose of my wife in such a monstrous way is a grotesque and malicious lie.
I see. Forgive me for raising such a painful subject. It is just that these stories circulate, and I wished to hear the truth from you.
The truth is that our marriage was a failure, a sad, miserable failure. And like any failing enterprise, it had to be dissolved. But let us move on. This is not a subject on which I wish to dwell.
As you wish. Let us turn to your work of this period, which grew increasingly dark and critical of society. Bleak House, with its ferocious attack on the Court of Chancery.
The Court of Chancery was a national disgrace, a legal machine that devoured the lives and fortunes of those who were unlucky enough to be caught in its gears. It was a symbol of everything that was rotten and corrupt in the English establishment. I wanted to expose its workings, to show how the law, which is supposed to be a source of justice, had become an instrument of torture and despair.
And then, Hard Times, a direct assault on the utilitarian philosophy that you saw as poisoning the soul of the nation. Utilitarianism, with its obsession with facts and figures, its contempt for imagination and fancy, was a philosophy that I despised with every fiber of my being. It was a creed that reduced human beings to mere cogs in an industrial machine, that denied the importance of art and love and wonder. I saw its effects in the grim factory towns of the North, and I was determined to fight it with the only weapon I had, my pen. It was in 1856 that you finally achieved a lifelong dream, the purchase of Gad's Hill Place.
Gad's Hill. Yes. When I was a boy, my father had pointed it out to me on one of our walks. If you were to be very persevering and were to work very hard, he said, you might someday come to live in it. It became a symbol for me, a symbol of everything I hoped to achieve. To finally own it, to be the master of that house, it was a moment of profound, almost overwhelming satisfaction. It was proof that the miserable boy from the blacking factory had, against all odds, triumphed.
The following year, 1857, was a pivotal one. You organized a theatrical production, a play that I myself wrote, The Frozen Deep, and for this production, you hired a family of professional actresses, the Turnins.
Yes, Mrs. Turnin and her 3 daughters. They were a talented family. We needed professional actresses to elevate the quality of the performance.
And one of the daughters, Ellen, was just 18 years old. She was beautiful, intelligent, ambitious. And you, Charles, were completely captivated by her.
Ellen was a remarkable young woman. She had a depth, a maturity beyond her years. We formed a close friendship, a meeting of minds. She understood me, my work, my restless spirit, in a way that others did not.
It was more than a friendship, Charles. It became the great love of your later life, an affair that you kept secret from the world, but which led directly to the most painful and public event of your life, the separation from your wife.
My separation from Catherine was inevitable. It would have happened whether I had met Ellen Turnin or not. 22 years of incompatibility had reached their breaking point. The pretense could no longer be maintained. It was poisoning my life, destroying my creative energy. I had to be free.
But the manner of it, Charles, it was brutal. You moved Catherine out of the house, away from her children. You took control of her life, her finances. And then, when rumors began to circulate about the reason for the split, you published a statement in the newspapers, a violated letter in which you praised your own conduct and publicly disparaged your wife. I had to protect my reputation. My public, my readers, they had a right to know the truth. There were vile rumors circulating, lies that I was having an affair with my own sister-in-law, Georgina. I had to put a stop to them. The statement was a necessary, if painful, step. I had to make it clear that the separation was amicable and that the fault lay in an essential incompatibility, not in any moral failing on my part. But it was not the truth, Charles. It was a carefully constructed fiction, a piece of public relations designed to cast you as the blameless victim. And it destroyed Catherine. It silenced her, isolated her, turned your own children against her. It was a cruel, unforgivable act.
You do not understand the pressure I was under. My entire career, my entire public persona was built on the ideal of the family, the sanctity of the home. I could not allow that to be destroyed by scandal and innuendo. What I did to protect my work, my legacy, my ability to continue to speak to the public on the issues that mattered. It was a sacrifice I had to make.
A sacrifice of your wife's happiness and reputation, and all for a secret love that you could never acknowledge. There are whispers, Charles, that you and Ellen had a child, a son, who died in infancy in France. Is there any truth to this?
Enough. These are matters of which you know nothing. My life with Ellen was my own. It was a private world, a sanctuary from the demands and hypocrisies of public life. I will not have it picked over and dissected like one of my own plots. It is no one's business but my own.
Forgive me. I have overstepped the bounds of friendship. But I see the toll these secrets have taken on you, the immense energy you expend on maintaining this double life. It is perhaps one reason you threw yourself with such ferocity into your new career, the public readings.
The readings, yes. They were a way to connect directly with my audience, to feel their response in a way that is impossible on the printed page. It was a kind of theatrical performance, a chance to inhabit my own characters, to bring them to life with my own voice. And yes, the money was considerable.
You were a magnificent performer by all accounts. You held audiences spellbound, but the physical and emotional cost was immense. Especially the more dramatic readings, The Murder of Nancy from Oliver Twist. It was said to be a terrifying, electrifying performance.
I gave it everything I had. I became Sykes. I became Nancy. I felt the rage, the terror, the despair. The audience would scream. Women would faint. It was exhilarating, but it left me utterly drained, my pulse racing, my voice gone. My doctor warned me against it, said it would kill me, but I could not stop. The pull of the performance was too strong.
While you were touring, you continued to write. You left Household Words and founded a new journal, All the Year Round. And in it you published two of your greatest later novels, A Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations.
A Tale of Two Cities was an experiment, a historical novel inspired by Carlyle's work on the French Revolution. It was a story of sacrifice and resurrection, of love and terror.
Great Expectations was a return to the themes of my youth, a story of class and ambition and the corrupting power of money. A more cynical, more world-weary book than Copperfield, perhaps, but a truer one in some ways.
It was in 1865, while returning from France with Ellen and her mother, that you were involved in a terrible accident, the Staplehurst rail crash.
It was a scene of unimaginable horror. The train derailed on a bridge, and our carriage was left hanging precariously over the edge. I managed to climb out and help Ellen and her mother to safety, but all around us were the dead and the dying. I spent hours tending to the injured, doing what little I could to comfort them. But the screams, the sight of the mangled bodies, it haunted me for the rest of my life.
You suffered a severe nervous shock from which you never fully recovered. It affected your health, your sleep, your ability to travel by train.
I lost my voice for 2 weeks afterwards, and I began to suffer from a strange listlessness, a feeling of disconnection from the world. The incident seemed to have aged me overnight. I felt my own mortality in a way that I never had before.
And yet, despite your declining health, you embarked on another grueling tour of America in 1867. Why, Charles? Why put yourself through that again?
The money. It was an obscene amount of money, Wilkie. Enough to secure my future and the future of my children and others who depended on me. I knew it was a risk. My health was failing. But it was a gamble I felt I had to take.
The tour was a triumph financially, but it wrecked your health. You returned to England a broken man.
It did. The American climate, the relentless schedule, the sheer emotional and physical effort of the readings, it was too much. I came home and collapsed. The doctors told me that if I did not stop, I would die.
You gave a series of farewell readings in London, a final, emotional goodbye to your public. And you began work on a new novel, a story that was a departure for you, a mystery. The Mystery of Edwin Drood.
I had always been fascinated by the darker side of human nature, by the secrets and lies that lurk beneath the surface of respectable society. I wanted to write a story that would explore those themes, a story that would keep my readers guessing until the very end.
But the end, of course, was never written. You died before the novel was complete, leaving the mystery unsolved.
And perhaps it is better that way. It has certainly kept people talking, has it not? The Droodists, they call themselves, the amateur detectives who have spent the last century trying to solve my puzzle. I rather like the idea of them all arguing and speculating for eternity. It is a fitting legacy for a man who always loved a good story.
On the day of your death, June 9th, 1870, you were at home at Gad's Hill. You had been working on Drood all morning.
I had. I felt unwell. I sat down to dinner and I collapsed. A stroke. I never regained consciousness. It was a swift and, I hope, a painless end. I had always dreaded a long, slow decline.
You wished to be buried in Rochester, in a quiet, private ceremony, but the nation would not have it. You were the nation's storyteller, and they demanded that you be laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, in Poets' Corner.
A grand public spectacle. It is not what I would have chosen, but I suppose a man's life is not his own in the end, especially not a man like me. My life belongs to my readers, to the characters I created, to the world I tried to describe.
And what a world it was, Charles! a world of immense light and shadow, of comedy and tragedy, of boundless energy and profound sorrow. You were a man of great contradictions, the champion of the family who destroyed his own, the voice of the poor who craved wealth and fame, the great moralist with a secret life. How do you hope to be remembered?
As a man who loved his work, as a man who tried, in his own flawed and imperfect way, to make the world a slightly better place than he found it, as a man who saw the magic and the mystery in the lives of ordinary people and who did his best to capture that magic on the page. And as a friend, Wilkie, I hope that I will be remembered as a good and faithful friend.
Of that, my dear Charles, there can be no doubt. You were the best of them, the very best.